Hi, my name is Himanshu. I'm a proud father, a corporate leader, and an investor. And I have ADHD.
Hi, my name is Darren. I'm a triathlete and tennis player. My day job, I provide consultation services for listed companies in the Web3 space.
Thanks for joining us today. Okay, so tell us what made you suspect, that you have ADHD.
I always felt that the way I function, or rather my executive functioning, seemed a bit off compared to what I saw amongst my close friends and even family members. I found that I would struggle to do things that I really know how to do anyway, but I will just struggle and struggle always. And while I would speak to my friends and then later on, in the later years with my spouse, they would understand a little bit, but I would always walk away feeling different. I knew that my firm had this employee assistance program where we can call and seek help of a mental health professional, and it's kind of free. Through a few sessions, the mental health professional, the psychologist, suggested that this seems like ADHD because there were many other symptoms. For example, I've never read a book in my life. My whole life, I've never moved beyond some comics and all. Even in school, I would find hacks around it.
I think from a young age, people have always said that Darren's full of energy, and I don't know whether it was a positive or negative way, but he was always this guy running around, disturbing people, can't focus in school. As I got older, I reached this stage where I wanted some clarity. Not that, and if it was ADHD, I knew I couldn't change it, but at least if I know, then you can start to model and structure your life around certain things. So that's when I decided to go and see a medical specialist. It was very, very quick. Within 15 minutes of interacting with me, he said, "Yep, you're ADHD, man." And he said, you do all these things that you don't realize. You fidget, you move, you can't sit still. Sometimes when you talk, you don't look at people's eyes. You just find it very hard to focus, and especially in quiet rooms, because your mind is kind of running all over the place at a million miles a second.
Yeah. So how did you react, building on that when it was confirmed that you have ADHD?
I think for just a bit, there was an aha moment. And then quickly reading up, okay, who else has ADHD, who are the famous people who have ADHD, and what are some of the typical advice out there, and so on. So just for a little bit, it was that. But after that, actually, really what it triggered in me is, okay, ADHD, fine. There are some tips and tricks for focus anyway, off the back of ADHD diagnosis, that I should explore. Some I realized were coping mechanisms and hacks that I was doing anyway over the years. If I was, let's say, diagnosed as a teenager, it may have been actually more helpful directly, because then a lot of those tools would have helped me in those phases of my life. By now, diagnosis or no diagnosis, I'm fairly stable and at a good place in life.
Right. How about you, Darren? How did you react?
I wasn't too shocked at ADHD. Obviously, I have multiple disabilities, so, but I think one thing that came about was relief, right? It's like, okay, so we know there's something there. It's very liberating to finally confirm. It's like I spent a long time doubting and thinking whether there was something wrong, and then I finally mustered the courage when I was like 35, 36 to finally go for my diagnosis. And when it's there, I thought I would have been afraid, but I realized that it was very liberating. And then you can start to rebuild and restructure certain things.
So sounds like both of you had, different but both very positive experiences in, gaining more knowledge about yourself. Were there any downsides? Like, for example, was there any stigma that you faced or experienced?
I basically joke about my disabilities every single day. If I get bored in a meeting, I say, "Sorry guys, ADHD guy needs to go to the toilet." Or if on the days my Tourette's is bad, I'll say, "I'm not making a pass at you, it's just me." That was where I needed to get to realize that I accepted myself. Where is there a stigma? There will always be. I think if we say that there's no stigma, it's not accurate. I know sometimes when people find out that, Darren's ADD, and all that, there's like, so is there something special we need to do for him? And that itself is a stigma on its own. But we can't help that. That's human behavior.
What I actually did find that, not from a stigma perspective, but actually just sharing that I have this, and as a result, especially now, I've tweaked the way I work and so on. With any colleagues, especially my bosses and my directs, I actually share this with them to say, this is how I work. Do understand that there are certain constraints just because how I work differently, because I do try to set aside periods of hyper focus so I can maximize some things. And as such, during those periods, I'm not really the type of colleague who's happy to just be disturbed and talk about something else. Stigma exists in our society, more so in Asian society than Western society. We're getting better. Globally, we're getting better. In Asia, we're getting better. And in Singapore, we're getting increasingly better in terms of talking about mental health. So the fact that we can now talk about ADHD more openly is just a sign of things that we are improving, and I'm quite optimistic that we'll continue improving that way as well.
You've shared about your reactions, right? So let's talk a bit about how did people around you react, when you shared with them that, oh, actually I found out I have ADHD.
For my wife, it was very interesting. She was like, okay, she also shared a bit of an aha moment to say, okay, this explains a little bit of some of the behaviors. And as such, she would then be a little bit more understanding about how my behavior is a lot more impulsive compared to hers. Yeah, my kids think it's cool to be unique, so they like that there's another tag to yourself. Say,
right.
okay,
so you actually explain to your kids what ADHD is.
Yeah.
Wow.
My daughter helped to edit my
Fantastic.
the feature article we were talking about, sharing my story. So yeah, so she has a full insight about my condition, and then she's way better at reading, and so I outsourced that task to her.
Right. And you said she's 7 and a half.
Yeah.
Right. How about you? How did your
It was quite surprising. I didn't know what to expect. So I mean, obviously my parents will know. So I told my mom and my dad. And that's where my mom actually said she actually kind of knew, but they wanted us to have the same journey that everyone had, which I'm very thankful for actually. I think it's taught me many things. It's also shown me many things. Came to a point where I finally shared with my friends. My friends and my close friends was extremely understanding. So generally there's this misconception that people are not inclusive. I just think it's because people don't know enough. But when they finally know and when you can put something to it and it relates, I think that's where the neurodiverse and neurotypical clap hands and shake hands and they say, we accept each other. They accept us, we accept them, and it's because there's a fear of the unknown. And when you remove the unknown, then people start to realize, okay, not everyone's the same.
Who or what are your pillars of support and how have they kind of helped you along this journey?
I think number one, I have better sense and insight now to credit is my mom, because she always had a very loving and understanding nature. So given I was a difficult kid in terms of doing what I'm asked to do and expectations of academics, which was very high in my family, so that's something that my mom never really pressured me too much into. And I realized that it primarily created a sense of safety that a good caregiver needs to provide. In a way, what helped me is in growing up in India, I studied in the same school, the same class from effectively what is a primary 1 to JC2. So 12 years is a boys' school, same bunch of guys. So I had very close friends. So as a support structure, it was very nice.
Yes.
And I like to go to school because the fact that I'll see my friends there.
Right, okay.
So those things were all very helpful in that phase of my life, which I think helped to create a lot of foundation in terms of confidence later on.
Yeah.
I think my parents were tremendous. From young all the way to today. I think sometimes my mom still checks up on me, which is really, really nice. I think the one thing that they did right was that they never forced me to do what I didn't want to do, which is very challenging if you consider the era that I grew up in, where it was a little bit more rigid than what it was now. And everyone was going towards, I think very similar, everyone was going towards the high grades, getting into a good school, the streaming. I think today you have more choices, but during my time it was really just that one path. And then when I finished my O-levels, and my mom asked me, so what is it you want to do? And I told her, but I thought you always wanted us to go to junior college, and she's like, no, I think for you pick whatever you want to do, right? So yeah, my parents have been one, my brother definitely, quietly he's been supporting me, very supportive. I've got good tennis mates that we're still friends with today. It's very funny, they always say that when you play tennis with Darren, you either get the guy that is turned on for 5 sets or completely loses interest after 2 points, right? And it's true, because that's how it is. But we remain really good friends. So I'm very fortunate, that through all of this, I've had very good friends. I've had excellent family. People who are generally very sensitive. They approach me and they say, okay, I know that this sometimes can be a bit of a problem, but let's have a chat and see what happens. And you know, sometimes when people do that, it removes that barrier, and things become, I wouldn't say easier, but things become a lot smoother.
So looking back, what kind of advice would you give to your younger selves?
I think I tell myself, don't put so much pressure on yourself. That's something that I did a lot in my younger days, even though I was very happy. You know, it seemed like I was very, very carefree and very happy-go-lucky, but I did put a lot of pressure on myself to be like other people. And that cost me in school a period of time where I was really doubting myself. Like, you get it, you know, the thing about me is that when I go through syllabus and curriculum, I get it, and I get it quite fast. But when it comes to the exam, however, that's where it kind of falls apart. And then you keep adding this pressure on yourself, right? One thing I realized is that I just need to, you know, just relax, take it easy.
Thanks. How about you?
Yeah, my main advice to myself would have been fairly similar, in the sense that I would compare myself to others, like my peers, and then as a result, be quite hard on myself. Why can't I read books when all my friends can read books, for example? They would be talking about the latest novel they have read and so on. And I would feel, have a kind of a inferiority complex developing out of it. To say, how come I cannot do this? I think I'm smart, but I cannot do this, which everybody else can do. The mental dialogue then you have, typically, for most people, is quite harsh. You are harsher on yourself compared to what you could actually say out loud to another person. So yeah, so to tone down the language in which how you speak to yourself, so that I wouldn't beat up myself for whatever things I just couldn't do.
So what were your passions when you were young?
Yeah, I think my passions probably have nothing to do with what I do now or what we grew up doing, and I've seen this a lot. As I was growing up over the teenage years, I really did struggle with academics, so I just knew that whatever I do has to be something where it has to be quite far off from reading and writing. And I did have an affinity or an aptitude for the STEM subjects, so it can involve experimentation and all of that. That is what I thought. So it could be something along the science lines is what I thought I will do. I did develop quite an interest in computers. So when I came to Singapore to do my undergrad, I studied computer science. So I think to an extent that was all right, because again, it's not so much about reading and writing and that kind of skill set. It's about figuring things out.
Yes.
I think how we evolve in our career from the point of time we start to maybe a little bit later in your career comes down to leveraging our strengths well and just dealing with the weaknesses enough so that they don't sink the boat. But beyond it, I don't focus too much on those things. And so as a result, I really think, and our strengths honestly have nothing really to do with ADHD. We have all these strengths regardless of ADHD or no ADHD. So I'm generally a person with a calm disposition. So I could utilize that in managing a lot of intensive transformation type of work in the bank or in the industry, because generally speaking, chaos doesn't bother me because I know things will work out, and having that kind of a disposition does help when you're steering the ship towards certain milestones or goals.
Darren, passions when you were young?
So when I was younger, I always wanted to be a professional tennis player.
Wow, this is
I actually pursued that for a while until I was 14. The thing about tennis that intrigues me, and it's not just about hitting a ball or, the thing about tennis is that you need to solve a lot of problems. And the biggest problem that's posed to you is because you're playing against a live opponent. And that led me to realizing that I really love to solve problems. And unbelievably so. And that has led to my career path in multiple entrepreneurship opportunities, and always in wanting to solve very, very complex problems. The more complex the problem, the more I love it, right? The things that I loved most in academics wasn't the simple questions. It was the stuff that really made me think and really made me do like 15 pages of working in college, I was a computer engineer by training, and I specialized in AI after that. And I loved it because it's such a complex issue to look at. And in today's context where my clients would trust me in the most complex of M&As and most complex digital transformation, Web3 projects that are out there, and they know that I'm not going to come back and tell them it can't be done because I would solve something. So while I never became a professional tennis player, I realized that wasn't it. I realized that it was because I enjoyed that want to break things down into smaller pieces. And in many ways that allowed my brain to function. when things are in smaller bite-sized pieces, you're then able to put things together a lot easier.
Great. So it sounds like the ideal job for you guys is something that has a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
like
complexity,
this
analysis.
hyper-focus aspect, because that's what I think I've also cracked a bit better over the years. Because when I started working, I actually did struggle in my career a lot. And I think I should say at least that I still struggle a lot at work, big time. It's just that one, I have a lot of self-compassion towards myself, so don't really beat up myself about it. But to the point of strengths, I think hyper-focus is a strength of many of the ADHD folks that I have spoken to as well. And now I'm able to leverage it better. For example, most of my work days are structured such that I have like 1 to 2 hours of hyper-focus every morning where I do my best quality work. And even if I do nothing else, because many days I may not do really anything else, I may just be like doing meetings and calls and all, but that is enough to propel my work forward.
I think for us who have ADHD, the way we work is not the regular burn, right? So these people, a lot of us, we go high energy level and you have this slightly deflationary. For us, it peaks, and then we take that and then we trough very fast, and then we kind of, and the mental exhaustion that comes after that is quite tremendous. I'm not talking about just on a daily basis. So I used to be a software developer, and my record is 108 hours without sleep. Right, and it wasn't because I didn't want to sleep. It wasn't because I'm trying to break a record. It's just because you're so focused on solving the thing and building the thing, you just go. And so the biggest challenge is actually pacing ourselves, because when you're hyper-focused, you accelerate. And when we accelerate, we're like marathon runners trying to run a sub 2-hour marathon. Right, we go at a very, very fast pace. And it takes a longer time to recover. Whereas the smarter marathon runners will go, let's go gradual burn, right? We pace ourselves, and so they can last.
But now on the flip side, I think what has definitely changed over the years is I actually don't try to do things. I leave things to last minute because I think I will do great as long as I've set aside time and I don't let other things creep into my calendar. In theory, there can always be some emergency and I may end up then missing out. But what I have actually done is, after struggling a little bit from this thing of doing last minute, not doing that well and all, is actually carving out that window to say I have something due. But
Yes.
I mean, I struggle all the time. There's some administrative things that I miss out a lot in terms of paperwork and so on. Again, there are things tools that I've become better equipped to handle, like having simple to-do lists. And I make it a point to at least every other day or a few days I go back to that list, so it's not missing altogether. So those things do help.
Okay. What other hacks or strategies do you have, like to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, so I guess this is why I started really going into endurance sport. So the way I structure my life is by a Google Calendar. I plan everything by the hour or by blocks, and I even regulate my training schedule. So it's not like, oh, I feel like going for a run, I go. So it's very regimental. Like every day I'm up at like 4:30 or 5 o'clock. And then it follows a process. And I even put rest as a planned thing. And I follow it extremely strictly. And I realized that when I was younger, I used to think that would have come off as a little bit rude. But sometimes if you don't take care of yourself, you end up being subproductive anyway. It's not gonna help you in any way. So, and it's helped a lot, because then whenever I feel like I'm getting a little bit lost again, I look at my calendar and say, okay, everything's in place. When everything's in place, because we can be quite unstructured, I can be quite unstructured. When I put structure to it and I force structure, it kind of takes this burden away from me. It's like, okay, everything is just follow, right? Just follow, and you know there are certain things that you need to hyper-focus and things don't need hyper-focus. And I think that's where it gets really, really, for me, that has been one of the biggest hacks. And that's how I've done it for the past 4 years, maybe.
So like that, there's so many actually productive things as well. Like I started a journaling habit a few years ago, and it is not something that I would naturally aspire to do, but then I made it a habit by always doing it while sipping my morning coffee. Morning coffee was something I enjoyed, so just by clubbing the two together, one, it automatically gets happened most of the days, and then I've also paired something which is mildly administrative, but also doing it with something that is nice. So I think all these kind of hacks for routine throughout the day actually take away the pain of all the things that otherwise would be difficult to do. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about like hacks and strategies. Let's talk a bit about the organizational level. What do you think organizations can do to really bring out the best in employees with ADHD?
Having worked in corporate sector my whole career, I find, and being exposed to quite a lot of organizations, whether directly as being an employee or indirectly through my clients and so on, I see a very diverse landscape in terms of appreciation of the employee's mental health and the openness of the organization to even talk about this. So I think that is number one that we need to think about. I think secondly, I do hope that there is an even-keeled treatment of mental health issues compared to physical health issues as well. This is at a societal level, not just in organizations, but it has to happen. There is no stigma about talking about physical health to say, oh, this morning I went for physiotherapy or I'm getting a surgery done next week. Why should there be a stigma to say this morning I went to see a mental health professional for a session, or next week I'm trying some medication for something and so on. We will get there, I think. It's just progress. It's just a process, and I can see progress in it.
I think organizations have an organizational behavior and organizational outcomes and values that they believe in. A lot of the HR people I speak to have found a very elegant way to get around this, and that is that they hire people for their job capability, not so much of who you are and what you represent, which is quite smart if you ask me, because when I spoke to my HR of a previous company I was working at, they said, we actually never even considered that. We just basically knew you had the skill sets and expertise, and we let you manage your own time because we are that kind of organization, right? I think the problem then comes when you are in an organization that's maybe sometimes a bit more traditional, a bit more rigid in its practices. Then comes the education process. But an organization is built by people. So if you are naturally in an organization where people are caring, regardless how rigid, that care comes downwards. And so I've seen, organizations that are very forward-thinking, but if the managers or if the reporting officers don't have the same empathy, it's independent of the organization already. So it's really about the people. It is very heartening to know that people are very, very empathetic these days, and they do express a lot of care and concern for their staff. I don't think we need to worry about organizations finding a place for diverse people. I think it's about finding a place for everyone. Everyone's struggling, and everything that's happened in the past 2 years will have very long tail effects. Everything from having to go back to the office every day to having flexible work schemes, work from home, you've got all these things. Everyone's trying to find balance. And in finding that balance, then everyone finds their way to move forward again. So I think organizations are generally in a very good place now as compared to previously, and they were already making gigantic steps, because if you speak to everyone who's in the HR role, they know that there are neurodiverse people in the organization, but they can't pick them out. They have to come out and say it. And so that's one thing I wanted to add. You have to say it. If you have a problem, you have to say it. If you have an issue, you have to say it. If you're facing a challenge, and it's not just neurodiversity, right? Depression, anxiety, anything mental health and wellness, you have to say it. We see doctors when we have a flu. So if you're not feeling well mentally, there's nothing wrong in seeing a doctor for that as well. And so I think organizations are already making gigantic strides forward. All of those I've spoken to, big or small, they are generally very empathetic towards their staff now. I'm glad to be part of this collaboration together with Uncommon Minds and Sparks.
Sparks is the disco.
No, you can just chop at the...
Why not? Just cut off the S lah. Okay, very good, very good. 1 quarter done.
Oh, 1 quarter.
Yes.
Okay.